Hello, my name is Crystal Armand, and this is my presentation on industrial agriculture for the Environmental Science Department, Dr. Deblina Mahamdar, for specifically the class ESCU 401, Environmental Science Policy and Management. This is for the term of Spring 1 in 2023 and is due on March 5th, 2023. Sidney Sheldon once said, "Try to leave the earth a better place than when you arrived." On the agenda for this presentation, we'll have the introduction, then the problem statement, the hypothesis, then the methods, the results, then the conceptual framework, a discussion, and then policies and action. Industrial agriculture was created to ensure food security for a growing population globally. At first, the thought of creating more efficiency through industrial agriculture could allow for higher crop yields, fewer farmers dedicated to one space, and thus creating the possibility of the farmers to tend to more land and resistance even to certain plant diseases and pests. Although the yields were tremendous, there were insidious consequences to using chemicals and over-farming a certain area of land. The soil degraded, the water supplies lessened, pollution rose, and even the pests adapted over time. In order to be able to continuously sustain these higher crop yields, we as a society need to take a step back and synthesize what worked with industrial agriculture with our roots of growing a food supply through the centuries. The problem statement would be that industrial agriculture negatively affects the environment. The practices associated with industrial agriculture degrade soil health, lessen water supplies, and contribute to pollution. An all too often looked over demographic that directly chooses what techniques and modalities to utilize within this respect are the farmers. The hypothesis is that it is imperative that common practices utilized by farmers and commoners move away from industrial agriculture and move towards a more integrative approach like sustainable agriculture. An example of a sustainable practice would be something like hugelkultur. We need to work with nature and not against it. Methods. The data for this policy brief was retrieved from a university advanced search tool via the University of Massachusetts Global. This search engine provides access to a variety of academic peer-reviewed journals, as well as journalists and books from experts within their respective fields. Harrison and Hester from 2012 wrote their book through the lens of chemists, who could understand the composition of the shifts that industrial agriculture was inflicting upon the soil, air quality, and water from a more technical standpoint. I utilized this resource because Harrison and Hester provided a non-biased and informative review of the data on the effects of industrial agriculture, while Gibson and Alexander from 2019 provided the obstacles that are in front of farmers, which expresses why industrial agriculture continues despite the surmounting evidence of how detrimental it is for the environment. Their book was published via the University of Nebraska. Naeem et al. From 2021 published their book via Columbia University, thus adding another scientific, yet academic, view to the research, which was provided in an unbiased and technical review of sustainable agricultures. Kahan et al. From 2022 conducted a study from a university in India by the Department of Environmental Science. Considering this was backed by the Department of Environmental Science within their uni, it was sure to be conducted via the scientific method and air any discrepancies within their testing should any have arisen. Shapani's from 2022 article provided a journalistic review of a specific sustainable agriculture practice, hugelkultur. Anam and Siddhartha from 2022 was then incorporated into the brief to provide a way to support the farmers in switching to more sustainable practices. Results. Here we're going to see a presentation of the results utilizing charts, graphs, and some figures. Harrison and Hester from 2012 express how industrial agriculture directly degrades the soil through the common practices associated with the trade, such as heavy machinery and large livestock units. The figure that we're looking at here shows the industrial technology and the flow of industrial agriculture. In this figure, we can see the impact of agriculture on soil quality. The main area of concern is the decline in soil organic matter, which is responsible for the fundamental element for living fauna in soils that also control other chemical and physical processes that are indicative of the ability for flora to grow prosperously. In this chart, we can see greenhouse gas emissions by the source in regards to industrial agriculture. And please note that energy is the biggest sector for the production of greenhouse gas emissions within the field. Beyond the decline of soil quality at the rate that industrial agriculture is consuming land resources, the practices are also responsible for emitting 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions, and the rates are continuously climbing from the emissions of the technology utilized, fertilizers, livestock, a small uptick in excess carbon dioxide from land conversion, and most alarmingly of all, nitrous oxide from the daily activities, which has an atmospheric lifetime of 120 years, which is related to the destruction of the stratospheric ozone. This table further shows the emissions that are associated with industrial agriculture. There are microbial pollutants that seep into water resources, such as rivers and coastal waters, that can negatively impact a variety of ecosystems and create environments for waterborne pathogens and diseases. While catchment systems are typically utilized for livestock and human excrement, the same is more difficult to say for chemical runoff or seepage. While looking at the Brundtland Report from the UN, one can see that industrial agriculture has been linked to an array of other environmental issues as well. The reports linked agriculture development to desertification, deforestation, and increasing levels of toxins, especially carcinogens, in our food and water supplies, and noted that although food production may have been outpacing population growth, over 510 million people remained hungry. Considering the detriment of industrial agriculture to a multitude of ecosystems, the greenhouse gas emissions, the soil degradation, and the waterborne pathogens, it's clear that industrial agriculture is indeed negatively affecting our environment. Even more alarming is the link between industrial agriculture and the decline between the nutrient content within the food produced by it. Over the course of the Green Revolution, for example, the protein content of global crop production declined by 4%, iron by 19%, and zinc by 5%. This can be attributed to the soil degradation and the fact that it's common practice in industrial agriculture to plant many of only one crop. As Leonardo DiCaprio once said, raising awareness on the most pressing environmental issues of our time is more important than ever. Now let's get into the conceptual framework. Yehuda Berg once said, with so much evidence of depleting natural resources, toxic waste, climate change, irreparable harm to our food chain, and rapidly increasing instances of natural disasters, why do we keep perpetuating the problem? Why do we continue marching at the same alarming beat? Naeem et al. From 2021 so eloquently put environmental sustainability as functioning in a manner that does not lead to changes in Earth's physical, chemical, or biological conditions that would jeopardize life. One needs to look at the symbiotic relationship that ecosystems have and then implement this framework into agriculture practices. Should humanity be able to sustainably produce enough crop to support the growing population and the demands that ensues, such as water and food? What this shift would include would be crop diversification that supports the growth of one another, also commonly known as companion planting, inclusion of animals that will assist in composting and pest removal, planting cover crops to help retain more water during rainfall, inviting pollinators, and improve soil health with creating a microbiome, perhaps even via worm castings and other ways. By creating these changes, one could lower greenhouse gas emissions, be more resourceful with water consumption, and increase the nutrient content in produce, restoring the soil gradually and creating a functioning ecosystem. However, what about the damage that industrial agriculture has already done? Is it irreversible? Kahan et al. From 2022 discovered a remarkable way that could reverse the damage done. What they found was that the key role and mechanisms of Arbuscular mycorrhiza fungi, so AMF for short, enhances plant nutrient uptake, immobilization and translocation of heavy metals, and plant growth promoting attributes, which may be suitable agents for plant growth under diverse stressed conditions. This means that even in degraded soil, the fungi was able to provide enough nutrients to promote the growth of flora and also mitigate those heavy metals and pollutants that are found from industrial agricultural practices. While the shift to sustainable practices within the field is imperative, it is a matter that is entirely within the farmer's hands. And as stated before, that comes with a variety of its own challenges. Anam and Sidarto from 2022 found that by empowering farmers groups, it was directly linked to increasing the population of farmers in order to use those sustainable agriculture practices. It was also found that the more that local government, community leaders, and even individual leaders within the farmers groups acted as wonderful motivators to shift away from industrial agriculture. It is so clear that industrial agriculture is negatively affecting the environment by contributing to 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions globally. Degradation of soil, which leads to lessened nutrient content within the produce and crop yielded, waters polluted, as well as local ecosystems as a result of the chemicals utilized, and it's linked to deforestation, ecosystem displacement, and more. When considering whether or not a farmer can switch over to sustainable agriculture, it becomes more difficult once the hurdles of economics, climate, water availability, and changing farm policies are weighed in. By supporting these farmers via the local, state, and federal government via subsidies and farmers' local support groups, it can assist them in switching over to sustainable agricultural practices. By reinvigorating soil health via several methods, including the AMF way to support plant growth, a reversal of the damage that industrial ag has wreaked on the earth, it can all be ameliorated. Shipani from 2022 also proposed utilizing hugelkultur, which is the process of creating a hill by placing plant waste, such as dead trunks and branches, in a stack. Then you place compost atop of it and grow the produce on the walls of this man-made hill within individuals' gardens to increase food security. Policies and action. Policies that could be implemented to solve this issue would be tax incentives, heavier taxations, and government subsidies. Policy option 1 would focus more on the farmers, the ones who are making the decisions to contribute to industrial agriculture in the large scale. Gibson and Alexander cite how the farmers, their families, their communities, and the risks that they face from unpredictable local, national, and global conditions, like fluctuating and often volatile production costs and crop prices, extreme weather exacerbated by climate change, complicated and changing farm policies, new production technologies and practices, water availability, inflation and debt, and rural community decline. The two further explore each point by examining 4 countries and just how the farmers are attempting to overcome these issues to feed their own families and produce enough yield to better their communities and even the growing global population. A common theme is that the farmers themselves are having difficulty keeping up with the costs associated with industrial agriculture. And yet it seems to be their only choice, as no other viable option will produce the yields that they need to maintain their livelihoods. What becomes clear from Gibson and Alexander in 2019 is that the agency is up to the farmers, and should there be a much needed shift away from industrial practices, it will be in the farmers' hands throughout this world, whether or not sustainable practices are upheld. So in order to promote that, we should give tax incentives to farms who utilize sustainable practices. When looking at companies and farms that continue to utilize the more typically industrial agriculture practices that we know are harmful to the longevity of the human race, heavier taxation could be placed upon them. This would incentivize those who are resistant to the shift to gradually move towards sustainable agriculture. The second policy option would be more on the homegrown level. There could be a campaign similar to the one that was running during World War II that incentivizes and encourages households to produce their own food supply through sustainable practices. These incentives could be in the form of tax incentives, of government subsidies, similar to the incentivization in America to promote the use of solar panels to alleviate stress on the grid. Once a new sustainable farm is created, or a household has established a sustainable garden to feed themselves, or a previously industrial agriculture business entirely switches to sustainable agriculture practices, then there could be government subsidies that are awarded to them proportional to the amount of the projected yield that they would produce. So, for example, the family would receive a sum for the size of a family, and the farm would receive a larger sum considering they would be feeding a population. This is where hugelculture can really come into play and assist those with their local garden or their family garden. Ban Ki-moon once said, "Sustainable development is the pathway to the future we want for all." In conclusion, industrial agriculture was a brilliant way to increase food production to feed the masses and growing population. However, after many decades of utilizing this type of technology and a variety of chemicals, it's become clear that these practices destroy the land more than it assists it. This destruction is leading humanity towards a path of food insecurity in the future, and so it is imperative that incentives are provided to encourage the switch to more sustainable practices. Sustainable agriculture is the future shift that will lead to food security and increased yields that can support the global population. Thank you for spending the time watching my presentation. Have a beautiful day.